Hey guys, coming to you today from my bedroom again. I just wanted to do a quick impromptu video. I wasn't planning anything very specific, but I had something on my mind that I thought would be kind of interesting as a topic of discussion, and that would be kind of interesting to share, especially with those of us who are in the tarot community or self-help community or spiritual community or pagan community in general. So yeah, I wanted to talk about this reading that I had, that I was giving myself, and the topics that came up and the themes that came up were vulnerability and beginnings, and addictions or self-defense mechanisms, and the relationship that all of those things have to each other when you experience them, and how those can discourage you from transforming yourself completely, or doing what you need to do to be a better person and develop better habits. So I was doing a personal reading for myself, and I wanted something specifically to journal on because for the past few months, I personally have been experiencing probably some of the most transformative ego death that I have ever experienced. It has been very wild. It's the kind of transformation and shift that you don't really go back from. There's no way that you can return to that former ego identity. So I wanted to do a reading because even though that transformation had taken place, I had begun to sense that there were some defense mechanisms and vices coming back into my life. So the cards that I picked and that I was excited to talk to you guys about and to journal about was the relationship between these two cards here. So we have the Fool and the Devil. And I just was pleasantly surprised to get these cards in the reading. I think that the relationship between the Fool and the Devil as tarot cards is so fascinating, and I think that it's something we all kind of experience at some point or another. I don't think that any of us, well, first of all, we're all the fools many times in our life. So the Fool representing the beginning of something. Now you might think of the Fool being very representative of childhood, and that may be true. The Fool may not always represent children in that regard. We are born and we begin again and again. Our egos see the death of one identity, and then come into being in a new form. Things happen in our lives that change us, and there's just no way that we're going back to the old way of being. Maybe we've given up something, we've given up a lifestyle, we've given up, it's a plane. Maybe we've given up certain habits, given up certain people, given up certain careers or dreams or aspirations because they just weren't healthy for us, and they just weren't helping us to become the best version rather of ourselves. So what I'm trying to say is that the Fool representing the beginning, ripe with optimism, ripe with fire, the question that is asked of the Fool, and that we all as fools must ask ourselves, is when he takes his blindfold off, because usually in the Rider-Waite tradition at least, he has a blindfold on. When he takes his blindfold off and sees the terrain that is yet to be traversed, and sees what he's dealing with and sees the landscape, sees the undulation in the hills and the elevation that he has to gain, is he still going to go on that journey? Is he still going to have the same attitude and the same optimism and the same belief in himself as he did when he was just starting out at the foot of the path with the trailhead marker saying this way, and him saying, oh yeah, I can do this, no problem, no big deal, I can do anything, I have plenty of energy, I'm rested up, I have plenty of water, but he's going to run out of water eventually. Maybe he's going to have to find some new water. He's not always going to be full of energy. He's not always going to have 10 hours of sleep, to kick off the journey. He's not always going to have those resources, and he's not always going to feel that way. And similarly, when we go through the same thing, sometimes when we, experience that death and that, I don't get to return to that old way, fine, I'll go and be the new person, I'll do the new thing, I'll birth myself again, fine, whatever. And that kind of sucks. But then you get excited because it's a whole new world and it's a whole new way of being, and the possibilities are endless and your eyes are open for the first time again. But then when you see that terrain and take the blindfold off, maybe you get discouraged. And that's when the old karmic patterns start to kind of creep their way back in. Now, in terms of the devil, and in terms of what it is that represents bondage, and addiction and vice for you, it could vary. The devil in tarot, I would only define it as, or read the devil card as being representative of bondage. So whatever that is, could be anything. It could be something that is traditionally and culturally taboo, and that is a bit more obviously insidious. So maybe something like a food, drug, alcohol addiction, sex addiction, love addiction, thrill-seeking addiction, gambling addiction, those sorts of things. Maybe for you, it doesn't even have to do with the traditional meaning of the word. Maybe it has to do more with self-isolation, or making excuses, or people-pleasing, or being addicted to taking too much on in life, being addicted to constantly having to be the one in charge, being addicted to passive aggression, being addicted to daydreaming and being inactive and passive in general. Those are all addictions, and those are all things that I think, if you ask me personally, I think are just as destructive and just as harmful and just as insidious as an alcohol addiction or a cocaine addiction or anything like that, because it's going to stall your life and it's going to stall your transformation. Obviously, there are more physical repercussions in certain vices than in others, but all are dangerous in their own way. And so the question that I think the juxtaposition of the devil and the fool have to each other is, as a baby on your path, as the fool on your path, how do you remain vulnerable and maintain that openness without being susceptible to corruption? And another thing that kind of made me think of this was I was watching a horror movie, because I love horror movies. And in the movie they were talking about demons, and the pastor was telling this woman whose house was being possessed that demons seek out the vulnerable. And this is a common mythology. This isn't like anything that nobody knows about. Everybody knows the mythology of demons, and it was just like, it was the day after I had done this little tarot reading, and so it just like jogged my thinking cap. Demons prey on the weak and demons prey on the vulnerable. And how coincidental is that? You know, how coincidental is it that, metaphorically speaking and symbolically speaking, we are the most vulnerable when we are at the beginning of our paths, and when we are just stepping out into the sunshine as this optimistic young archetype of a person. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how to necessarily maintain that vulnerability. I'm working on it. I think it's such an interesting question, and I think that it's such an interesting topic of conversation. And I would guess that the key to maintaining that balance and to maintaining those boundaries with yourself and your self-destructive behavior patterns, your karmic lessons, if you will, is, as with most things, self-awareness is probably a good first step. I think that for someone like me who is a bit more passive in life, checking in with yourself daily is a good start. Not being hard on yourself, checking your negative self-talk whenever you hear that happening, and just handling yourself gently and handling yourself in a way that isn't too rough, because you're in a soft space and you're in a vulnerable place, and you don't need to be any harder on yourself than the world is or anyone else is. There are already so many things that you're going to encounter and so many things that are going to challenge you, that if you can't find it within your own heart and within your own self to be forgiving, yet take accountability and say, yep, that happened. Yep, I just did that thing. Yep, I just thought that thing that makes me feel weak and that, you know, makes excuses for this behavior. And self-awareness is the key, I'm guessing. Self-awareness, forgiveness, accountability. And yeah. I once was listening to this podcast. I listen to Mark Maron sometimes. Thumbs up if you listen to Mark Maron too. And he was doing this really interesting podcast with Fiona Apple a few years back. And I love Fiona Apple. Love her music. I'm always wondering what she's up to, what she's doing. And she once said that even as an adult in her 30s, she sometimes carries books with her, parenting books about how to discipline a child and the different ways that you can do that. And Mark asked her, why? Do you have any kids? What do you carry those books around for? And she said, well, you're always in a parent-child relationship with yourself. I mean, in a way, that relationship is always going to exist inside you. There's always going to be a part of you that wants to steal the cookie from the cookie jar, and that wants to throw temper tantrums, and that wants to blame the person sitting next to them for whatever they did, and fear. And so correcting that relationship, you know, in a very conscious way, through reading those books, is a way that I can do that. Paraphrasing. And I thought that was so interesting. So if there's a note that I want to leave this video on. I know I'm not offering up any solutions or advice, and I'm sorry for that. Just kind of rambling and getting my thoughts out. It's that the parent-child relationship for sure is always going to exist within you. And I think that that's such a healthy, shadow worky way of looking at it. And I think that that's so cool. And to anyone out there who's experiencing a great, dramatic, personal shift, and you're feeling very vulnerable, and you're feeling that karmic schluck creeping back up, and those old thought patterns and those old behaviors starting to take the reins, I would implore you to, again, just be kind and gentle with yourself. And to know that that's not the last that you're going to see of that monster. That's not the last that you're going to hear of that monster. And there's a lot of terrain to cover, and there's a lot of elevation to gain. But that with the proper energy and with the proper affirmations, you can do it. And you're not going to be the fool forever. You're going to be the fool again at some point. I mean, it's just bound to happen. But it's okay. And that's life. Life is change, man. It's change. It's death, birth, growth, death, birth, growth. Again and again. So take it easy. And be kind to yourself. Get out there and enjoy the sunshine. Enjoy the people in your life that bring you happiness. Enjoy the things that bring you happiness. And look in the mirror and tell yourself that you're all right. And you're worth it for sure. And don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Not even yourself. That's just what I had on my mind today. I thought I'd make just a little talky, rambly video. I've never done one of these before, so excuse the but yeah, I enjoyed this, and if you have any thoughts on the relationship between the devil and the tarot, or vulnerability and beginnings and vices catching up to you or catching you off guard, I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below, and hopefully we can all empathize with each other. So yeah, thanks for the video, guys, for watching the video, and see you next time. Bye.